Welcome to my guide on the best graphic settings for Sea of Thieves. I'm going to first show you the most competitive settings you can use for visibility and performance, and I'm going to show you how to make your game look a bit nicer without sacrificing on your frames. We're going to be going through the video settings and the graphic settings of your game today, starting with video settings. I recommend using 12 if you're on a newer PC. Unless you're on a really old PC, I would recommend leaving this on 12. Multi-core rendering, I recommend having this on unless you have a really old CPU. Full screen resolution, set this to whatever your full screen resolution is. I just use recommended native. If you have problems with this and you know your resolution, then you can manually choose one from the list here. But it should just be recommended native. Display mode, full screen, VSync off. This means that your frames won't get capped to your monitor's refresh rate. Brightness, I like to set this a little bit higher. This might be different for your monitor if your monitor's a bit brighter, but I recommend putting this to 60. Some people will turn this up during the night so they can see a little bit better, but they wouldn't usually go beyond 70 unless they have a really dark monitor. Color contrast, I use 40, and this goes together with my colorblind settings. Even though I'm not colorblind, I use a specific colorblind setting to make my game look more vibrant, and I believe this helps with visibility and making my game look nice. Frame rate lock. I recommend putting this to 144 because the only next option is off unless you use external tools to cap your FPS, which I don't recommend because it can cause instability. Capping this at 144 prevents a bug that happens at 223 or higher FPS, where if you turn your wheel while on 223 or higher FPS and then leave the wheel, you rubber band back. So I recommend capping this to 144 to prevent that. Although recently Sea of Thieves has stated that you should cap at 120 or even lower if you want a more consistent performance. I recommend putting it at 144 because I don't notice the improvements at 120, but allegedly capping it at 120 will give you the most stable performance. So if you don't mind your game being a little bit lower FPS, which I personally don't like, I would cap it here, but I personally will always be capping mine at 144. Performance counters. I put FPS and ping on. You don't need this. This just lets you know what your FPS is and obviously what your ping is. Buffering. I would leave this on double. Putting this any higher will increase input lag, but you'll get a more smooth frame rate. Resolution scaling. If your PC is struggling to perform and run the game with high FPS, you can turn this down. Your game will appear more pixelated and blurry if you lower this, so I would leave this at 100 for a normal experience. If you put this down to 50 and your game is not running well enough still, you can also lower your resolution, but notice that your game will look a lot more pixelated and a lot more blurry. You can raise this higher if you have a really good PC. This will help with anti-aliasing because it'll upscale, but I don't recommend doing this unless you have a crazy PC and you don't mind potentially getting some input lag from this. Auto skip intro animatic, obviously I leave that on because it lets me launch quicker, it's whatever. Graphic settings. Put your field of view as high as it goes, which is 90 right now. Hopefully someday that goes higher, but it's been about 7 years. They haven't raised it, unfortunately. Now, shadow detail. If you want the best performance, best visibility, put this on cursed. You will notice a slight flicker. If you don't like that, put it to common. This is what I personally leave it on, unless I'm playing on Galleon, where I feel that I need the extra performance and visibility, and I put it to cursed. But if you leave this on common, it's completely fine for visibility. It's just a little bit more performance intensive, slightly. Putting this to rare is a big step up in shadows, and anything beyond rare just improves the sharpness of those shadows. But if you go from common to rare, there's a major difference in the shadow quality. Model detail. If you have this on rare, you will get the best render distance. This means that the distance that items render in, not players, players are the same for any setting, but the distance that items that you hold in your hand, for instance, storage crates, kegs, this gives you the best maximum distance for rendering. So if you put this at common, you won't see kegs that are a certain distance away that you will see if you're on rare. So anything above rare won't improve the distance you see things at, it'll improve the distance that the quality increases. So if you have a good PC, which I do, I would put this to mythical, but it's not a necessary setting. You can leave this on rare and your performance and visibility will be completely fine. Texture detail, I like to put this on mythical because I have a good PC, and this just improves the sharpness of textures. Putting this down will increase your FPS on lower spec PCs. Personally, I don't really notice a major difference when I lower this because I have a good PC and I can perform well based on textures. That's not my bottleneck, but you can obviously turn this down at the risk of lowering the sharpness of textures, and it can ruin your visibility a little bit. So I'd recommend leaving this on at least rare, but if you have a good enough PC, just leave this on mythical. This is just the resolution that textures are rendered at. Water detail. If you want the best visibility to see through water, to see borders, and to see people in the water, I would put this on cursed. There's also a bug right now where if you turn this up to rare and then back down to cursed while you're playing, your water will lose all whitecaps and you can see even better, except for when you're in the water near an island looking up. If you're in the water near an island looking up, the water is solid and you can't see through it until you're a certain distance away from the island. but there's no whitecaps. That's the trade-off with this bug. If you launch the game while it's on cursed, you won't notice this bug. You'll have whitecaps and low quality water, which is good for visibility, but you will still have whitecaps, which can block it a little bit. So I would recommend leaving this on cursed all the time. And then if you're in open seas and someone's boarding you, if you have time, you can turn this to rare and then back down to curse. And for the rest of that session, you won't have any whitecaps, but you won't be able to see through the water as clearly near islands. That's a bug. It could get patched, but I recommend leaving water detail on cursed regardless. Lighting detail. I 100%, no matter your spec, no matter your PC, recommend leaving this on cursed. Unless you're trying to take a screenshot or you're trying to take cinematic footage. This is the smallest thing, but absolutely ruins your performance. Having this higher up adds a glow effect to lights. Lowering this down brightens your game, improves your visibility, and doesn't sacrifice how your game looks a lot, especially when you're playing it at a fast pace. If you're playing this game incredibly slowly and you're just taking cinematics, sure, turn this up, whatever. But this is a major difference maker for your performance and visibility at the benefit of such a small aspect of graphics. Particle effects quality, this relates to the quality of animations and particles and explosions. So I would recommend lowering this as much so you can see through things as much as possible, especially cannon flares. There's probably some effort to make sure cannon flares are consistent across these, but I wouldn't trust it. It only goes up to rare, but I would leave this on cursed. Particle resolution. This only changes the sharpness of particle effects. So this doesn't make your visibility worse if you have this higher or lower. I personally will sometimes leave this on mythical so that my particles are sharp and I'm maybe able to see through them a little bit better, but leaving this on curse is completely fine for performance and the visibility shouldn't be much different. If you're really concerned about visibility, I would recommend putting this on mythical, but it's unlikely that this makes a massive difference. Animation quality. This changes the number of active animations. There are potentially bugs and issues in this game where if you're hitting lots of shots and splash damage is coming off of boats, in animations like explosions. In theory, this might affect that and prevent bugs with that, but I would say keep this on cursed. It shouldn't matter. You shouldn't really notice it unless you're around like 10, 20 people at once and you're all shooting guns and cannons and doing emotes and stuff. This supposedly changes the frame rate that emotes render at when there's a lot of people doing emotes near each other. So unless you're trying to record footage, I would leave this on cursed for usual gameplay. Unique mesh buffer, I would also just leave this on cursed. This is essentially like a popping thing, I'm pretty sure. I haven't been able to notice much of a difference using this on cursed versus mythical in terms of frame rate, but I have a good PC. I would recommend just leaving this on cursed and not worrying about it. By default, this is on cursed anyway. Visibility, obviously disable blur, obviously disable screen shake, and disabling rats on your ship is a performance boost, but also I find the rats distracting, and there's some benefit to them because they come up to top deck when there's water below deck, but it's unnecessary. If you're a good enough player, you can hear the water. It's not a concern. The water level sounds are very noticeable. You don't need rats. It only hurts your performance, only hurts your visibility. I don't recommend it, so I'd leave this on. Now, I use a color blindness filter. I talked about this before when I set my contrast to 40. I use a green-red 0.5. You can test putting this a little higher, but I find it gets a bit overpowering and the sky and the water become a very similar shade of blue and I just find it yucky, and the orange at sunset gets too powerful. So I just turn this on for a soft boost in my green-red, and I put it at 0.5, so it's nice and low. Saturation level, I leave this at 1.0. Some people put this at 0.9 or 0.8 and then boost their green-red and they get a sort of counter effect where it's a little bit nicer, but it's still a softer color. I recommend 0.5, 1.0. I have an old video about this as well. High contrast kill markers. This makes your red kill marker into a white kill marker. I don't recommend this because it just makes it harder to see when you get a kill. The only difference between the kill marker and the hit marker is that it's a bit bigger if you have this on. They're both white, and you get music when you get a kill sometimes. Sometimes the music doesn't play, which is why I recommend having this off so you can see the red marker and know for sure that you got a kill even if no music plays. High contrast X marks the spot. This makes the X marks the spot on maps white instead of red, and I actually do recommend this for doing PvE, but I don't really do much PvE because there are some bushes in the game that are red and you can see better on the map if it's white. Not a massive game changer. And that's all my graphic settings in Sea of Thieves. I recommend using these for performance and visibility. If you do want your game to look a little bit nicer, the only settings you should really change is your shadow detail up to rare and your water detail up to rare. And then if you want that improved, you can boost these two up to mythical. But if you want your game to look nice while you're playing it and still have some level of visibility, this is what I recommend with rare shadows and rare water, and then everything else the same as I said before, which is mythical, mythical, and then these are all on cursed. So shadow details being on rare just makes your shadows a big step up and not super sharp unless you boost it up to mythical. They become sharper and defined finer lines. And then water detail on red shows the water levels and ripples over it, and it looks a lot nicer, but you can't see through it as well. So I recommend leaving this on cursed, leaving this on common or cursed if you don't mind the flickering. I leave it on common because I don't like the flickering. But overall, for competitive settings, this is what I recommend. Common, mythical, mythical, the rest cursed. For a little bit nicer gameplay, I recommend rare, mythical, mythical, rare, everything else cursed. And I'll show you the difference right now. This is my boat in the nicer settings where I've got some shadows, the water looks really nice. With my settings that I run most of the time. Notice my boat is a bit more visible, especially below deck. I'll show you the difference right now. Rare shadows, common shadows, and then the next step down, cursed shadows are even better to see. But this is what I normally play at, where the water is a lot smoother and I can see through it a lot easier, if there's someone in the water especially. Cheers!